Pam Bondi was supposed to be there. She was subpoenaed. She was scheduled. She was the one person in that room who could finally answer the questions that have been hanging over the Epstein case for years, and then she simply didn't show up. No explanation, no emergency, no last-minute filing, just silence. The chair was empty, and the moment that chair stayed empty, something shifted in Washington that nobody is fully talking about yet. Because when the Attorney General of the United States goes dark on a congressional hearing about Jeffrey Epstein, that silence isn't just an absence. It's a statement, and the Democrats in that room heard it loud and clear. What happens next is the story that every major outlet is covering around the edges, but nobody is telling straight. Because this isn't about politics. This isn't about which party you support or which side of the aisle you sit on. This is about a woman who holds the most powerful law enforcement position in the country, deliberately vanishing from a proceeding specifically designed to get answers about one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern American history. And the people who showed up to ask those questions are not going to let it go. So where did she go? What was she hiding from? And why, at the exact moment Congress needed her most, did Pam Bondi go completely dark? I'm going to show you exactly what happened, who pushed back, and why the fallout from this no-show is just getting started. Let's go back to how we got here, because Bondi's absence didn't come from nowhere. It came from a process that had been building for months, a process that started the moment the Epstein files became the most politically radioactive documents in Washington. When the Justice Department under Bondi's leadership began receiving pressure to release unredacted records related to Epstein's network, the responses were slow, measured, carefully worded. They released just enough to quiet the loudest voices and held back just enough to protect whatever was underneath. That pattern, release a little, delay a lot, became the signature of how this administration handled the Epstein question, and Congress noticed. The Judiciary Committee had been pushing for direct testimony from Bondi for weeks. Not a written statement, not a spokesperson, not a carefully crafted press release. Her, in that chair, under oath, answering specific questions about specific documents, specific names, specific decisions about what gets released and what stays buried. The hearing was set. The date was confirmed. Members of both parties cleared their schedules. Cameras were positioned. And then, with almost no warning, Bondi's office sent word that she would not be attending. The reason given was vague enough to be insulting. Scheduling conflicts, that was it, for a subpoenaed cabinet official. Scheduling conflicts, here's what you need to understand about what that no-show actually meant. When you're the Attorney General and you've been asked by Congress to appear and explain your department's handling of the most high-profile criminal case in recent memory, you don't skip it because your calendar is busy. There are people in Washington whose entire job is to manage the AG's calendar. There are legal teams whose function is to negotiate the terms of these appearances. A scheduling conflict at that level isn't an accident, it's a decision. And decisions like that are made for a reason. The Democrats in that room understood the reason immediately. And their response was not polite. Representative Ted Lieu, who had been preparing specific questions around financial records connected to Bondi's previous work in Florida, didn't hide his frustration. He laid it out directly. You don't miss a hearing like this unless you're afraid of what you'll have to say when you get there. That's not a political attack. That's a logical observation. And it landed in that empty room like a verdict. But here's where it gets genuinely complicated. Because Bondi's history with the Epstein case doesn't start with her appointment as Attorney General. It goes back to Florida. It goes back to 2013. It goes back to the decision by the Florida Attorney General's office, which Bondi was running at the time, to decline to join a federal investigation into Jeffrey Epstein that could have put him away for much longer and exposed many more names. That decision, that specific choice not to pursue charges that prosecutors believed were viable, has never been fully explained. And now she's running the Justice Department, and Congress is asking her to explain it, and she didn't show up. The $847,000 question. That figure keeps surfacing in this story, and it matters. During Bondi's tenure as Florida AG, a nonprofit connected to Donald Trump made a substantial contribution to her campaign in a transaction that drew scrutiny at the time and has never been fully resolved. The timing of that contribution overlapped with the period during which Florida declined to expand its Epstein prosecution. Nobody has proven a direct connection. That much needs to be stated clearly. But the question has always existed, and it has always deserved a direct answer. And the person best positioned to give that answer was scheduled to sit in a congressional hearing room and face exactly those questions. And she didn't show up. Representatives on the Democratic side of the committee didn't just express frustration. They moved. Within hours of Bondi's no-show, ranking members began drafting formal contempt referral language. That's not a rhetorical move, that's a legal process. Contempt of Congress is a mechanism that exists specifically for situations where officials with subpoenas decide their schedule matters more than congressional oversight. It's rarely used at the cabinet level. It's almost never used successfully when the sitting president controls the Justice Department that would prosecute it. But the Democrats filing it anyway tells you something important. They know the contempt referral probably won't result in prosecution right now. What it will result in is a public record. A documented statement that the Attorney General of the United States refused to cooperate with a congressional investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. That record doesn't expire. It doesn't get buried. It lives in the official proceedings of Congress, and it follows everyone whose name is attached to it. Let's talk about what Democrats were specifically trying to ask. Because the hearing wasn't a fishing expedition. It was a targeted session with specific documented questions built on specific documented evidence. The first area of inquiry was the unredacted files. Prosecutors and investigators who have seen portions of the Epstein documentation that has not been released publicly have indicated that those documents contain names, not peripheral names, central names, people who were not minor figures in Epstein's network, but significant ones. The Justice Department under Bondi has control over what gets released, what gets redacted, and what never sees the light of day. Democrats wanted to know on what basis those redaction decisions were being made, what standard, who applied it, who approved it. Was it legal process or political calculation? Bondi was the one person who could answer that, and she left the chair empty. The second area was communications. Between the Justice Department and the White House, specifically around the Epstein file releases that were made publicly available in the weeks before the hearing. Documents that some analysts described as strategically timed to appear like transparency while actually withholding the most sensitive material. Were those releases coordinated with political staff? Who made the decisions about timing? What was communicated between Bondi's office and the administration about managing the public narrative around the Epstein disclosures? These aren't hypothetical questions. They're procedural questions about the conduct of a federal department that is supposed to operate independently of political influence. And the person responsible for that department's conduct didn't show up to answer them. The third area was the Florida connection, the 2013 decision. The sequence of events that allowed Epstein to receive what many legal analysts have described as an extraordinarily lenient prosecution outcome in a state that had substantial evidence to pursue something much more serious. Bondi was the chief law enforcement officer of Florida during that period. She has never given a full public accounting of her office's decision-making during that investigation. She has never sat under oath and walked through exactly what information her office had, what decisions were made, who made them, and why the outcome looked the way it did. Democrats had assembled a documented timeline, and they were ready to walk through it with her question by question. And she wasn't there. Here's what the strike back actually looks like. Because Democrats using the word strike back isn't just emotional language. It describes a specific set of actions that are now in motion. The contempt referral is the headline, but underneath it is a much longer set of moves. Subpoenas to Bondi's staff members, requests for communications logs between the DOJ and the White House, demands for the internal decision-making records around the Epstein file redactions, and a public pressure campaign designed to make Bondi's absence from that hearing the story itself rather than whatever she might have been trying to avoid by not showing up. That last piece is already working. The coverage of her no-show has been significantly more damaging to her reputation than anything she would have faced by appearing and giving carefully prepared testimony. She walked away from the hearing thinking she was avoiding a bad day. She may have walked into the worst month of her tenure instead. Former prosecutors who have watched these situations play out describe the dynamic clearly. When a high-profile official refuses to appear before Congress, they get one bad news cycle from the refusal. But every subsequent development in the underlying case now gets filtered through the question of why they were afraid to testify. Every new Epstein document that surfaces, every new name that appears in the records, every new disclosure about what the Justice Department knew and when it knew it. All of it now comes with the asterisk that the person running that department refused to sit in a chair and answer questions about it. That asterisk is impossible to remove. It's in the record permanently. The political calculation Bondi made by not showing up rests on one assumption: that the base of support she draws from doesn't care about Epstein accountability and will never punish her for avoiding this hearing. That assumption might be right in the short term. It is almost certainly wrong over time, because the Epstein case is not a partisan issue at its core. There are voters on every side of the political spectrum who believe the people in Epstein's network should face full accountability and that the documents connecting them to his crimes should be completely public. The anger around this case does not respect party lines. It does not respect cabinet titles. And it does not respect scheduling conflicts. Pam Bondi went dark. She had a chance to sit in that room, answer the questions, defend her record, and either put this story to rest or at least demonstrate that she had nothing to hide. She chose not to. That choice is now the story. That choice is now the document. That choice is now the thing that every future development in this case will be measured against. And the Democrats who were in that room when her chair stayed empty are making sure of that with every filing, every subpoena, every press statement, and every moment they stand at a microphone and say the same thing to every camera pointed at them. She was supposed to be there. She was supposed to answer. She chose silence, and silence in Washington, especially around Jeffrey Epstein, is never just silence. It's a signal, and everyone who was in that hearing room received it. The question now is what they do with it. Because the record is building. The files are still out there. The names are still in those documents. And the chair that was empty yesterday is going to be a lot harder to keep empty tomorrow. The Democrats who struck back today are just getting started. And Pam Bondi going dark may turn out to be the moment this story went from a background conversation to the loudest thing happening in Washington. Stay close, because what comes next in this investigation will not be quiet. And trust me, this is only the beginning.